Greetings, opera lovers. It's nice to be with you once again. Today's program focuses on bass singers, a vocal category I have somewhat overlooked until now. Basses tend to be cast as larger-than-life characters, such as gods, villains, or kings, in part due to the low register of their voices. An imposing, authoritative bass will definitely command your attention. You will hear from 9 of my favorite basses with arias in Italian, French, German, and Russian. The oldest of these singers date back to the 19th century. The 2 youngest are still living, and the recordings span more than a century. French bass Pol Plançon was born in 1851 and made his operatic debut in 1877. He sang at the Paris Opera, Covent Garden in London, and in over 600 performances at the Metropolitan Opera in New York from 1893 to 1908. Though his voice is somewhat lighter in timbre than some other basses, his technique, tone, and phrasing were flawless. My favorite critic and authority on opera singers is John Steen, who wrote several books, including The Grand Tradition, 70 Years of Singing on Record. Referring to Plançon, he writes, "Beauty of tone, mastery of technique, devotion to the art, and authority of style. These should surely be features common to the great singers of any age that one might want to call golden. If anybody had them all, in the right proportions and in high degree, it was the French bass, Pol Plançon. What a golden age singer should be, he was." Although he may not have sung this role on stage, his recording of King Philip's great aria from Verdi's Don Carlos is one of his finest. The setting for this aria is the king's study just before dawn. He laments that the queen has never loved him, that her heart is closed to him, and that he shall sleep only with his royal robes until he dies and is buried in his tomb. To those accustomed to hearing this aria in Italian, it may come as a surprise that Verdi's opera Don Carlos was originally written in French and premiered in Paris in 1867. This recording was made in 1907, some 30 years after the singer's debut. I find it amazing that we have a recording from 113 years ago by a singer who was born almost 170 years ago.
royauté nous donnait le pouvoir de lire au fond des cœurs où Dieu seul peut tout voir. Oh, si la royauté nous donnait le pouvoir de lire au fond des cœurs où Dieu seul la trahison se trame. On lui ranie sa couronne et sa femme. Elle ne m'aime pas. Non, son cœur m'est fermé.
Born in poverty in 1873, Russian bass Feodor Chaliapin would rise from obscurity to become one of the great singers of his generation. A towering, charismatic man with a powerful voice and commanding stage presence, he's widely regarded as the greatest actor-singer the operatic stage has ever known. His early career was nurtured by a wealthy industrialist and patron of the arts in Moscow, as well as a fortuitous relationship with a young composer and pianist, Sergei Rachmaninoff. Chaliapin was so enthralled with Mussorgsky's opera Boris Godunov that he studied all of its roles, both male and female. This opera's popularity in the West was certainly enhanced by its introduction to Covent Garden in 1913 with Chaliapin in the title role. Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov is, in my opinion, the greatest Russian opera. It's a dark, brooding work based on historical figures from the 16th and 17th century. In this scene, Boris has been in power for 6 years. While his power is absolute, he is tormented by plots against him and guilt over the murder of the child who should have become Tsar. The monologue concludes with these words: Russia groans in hunger and poverty, and in this dreadful misery sent down by God to punish me for my grievous sin, all blame me for this calamity. Everywhere the name of Boris is cursed. Even sleep escapes me, and in the darkness of night, the blood-stained child appears. His eyes are ablaze, his hands upraised, begging for mercy. But there is no mercy. His terrible wound is gaping. I can hear his last cry, "Oh my God, my God."
Дитя огромное
While Chaliapin had his critics, some found his theatrics to be over the top. It would be hard to overstate his influence on subsequent generations of bass singers, especially in Russia. One of the best of the next generation was Mark Reizen. Born in Ukraine in 1895, he was a soldier in the First World War and studied engineering before focusing on a singing career. Like Chaliapin, he was a tall man and had a commanding stage presence. He rose to become a principal bass at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow from 1930 until his retirement in 1954. Critic and writer John Steen found, quote, "The mere sound of the voice immediately impressive, deep, warm, firm, authoritative," unquote. The nature of their voice production tends to favor longer careers for bass singers than those in the higher ranges. The previous two excerpts you heard were recorded when the singers were in their late 50s. In 1985, when he was 90 years old, Reizen sang the role of Gremin in Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin at the Bolshoi. In Act 3, Onegin is shocked to find that Tatiana is now married to this retired general, Prince Gremin. The elder gentleman sings a moving aria about the love of his life. I'll translate a portion of the text. Love is no respecter of age. It blesses alike those in the bloom of youth, yet unacquainted with the world, and the gray-haired warrior tempered by experience. Onegin, I shall not disguise the fact that I love Tatiana to distraction. My life was slipping drearily away, and she appeared and brightened it, like a ray of sunlight in a stormy sky, and brought me life and youth. Yes, youth and happiness.
Едва увидевшему свет, и закаленному судьбой бойцу седою головой. Онегин я скрывать не стану, я люблю Татьяну, тоскливо жизнь моя текла, она явилась и зажгла, как солнце луч среди ненастья, и жизнь, и молодость, да, молодость и
Ezio Pinza was born in Rome, Italy in 1892. He enrolled in the conservatory at Bologna and made his debut at Cremona in 1914. He served as a soldier during World War I, then resumed his singing career after the war, making his debut at La Scala in 1922. With his handsome good looks, magnetic personality, and one of the smoothest bass voices ever, he was in demand and appeared in major opera houses around the world. He made his debut at the Met in 1926 and went on to sing with the Met over 800 times until 1948. In spite of his conservatory training, he never learned to sight-read music, but learned by ear. We're going to hear an aria from Verdi's Ernani, recorded in 1929 and considered one of Pinza's finest. This opera is set in early 16th century Spain. The heroine of the opera, Donna Elvira, is engaged to Prince de Silva, but her true love is Ernani. His rival is Don Carlos, King of Castile, who has managed to secretly enter her quarters. And this being an opera, as Elvira is protesting the presence of Carlos, Ernani enters the room through a secret panel. Then Silva joins the party and is shocked to find Elvira in this compromising position. In his aria, Infelice et tuo credevi, he laments the shame that has befallen him. He is sad that the fair maiden whom he had believed was pure as a lily has so disappointed him. He asks, "Why, oh why, at my age, must I retain such a youthful heart? Would that my years could have turned my heart to ice."
E mai vecchio, nel penetral più sacro di mia magione, presto a lei che sposa esser dovrà d'un Silva, due seduttori io salvo. Entrate o là, miei fidi cavalieri, sia ognun testimon del disonore, dell'onta che si reca al suo signore. Tuo credevi, sì bel Giglio immacolato, del tuo crine fra le nevi, piomba invece il disonor. Oh, perché del seno, giovin core m'ha serbato, e dovevo gli anni almeno far di gelo ancora il cor, far di gelo ancora il cor, for di gelo, ancora il cor, mi doveva gli anni almeno, far di gelo ancora il cor, ancora il cor. Doveva gli anni almeno far di gelo ancor il cor.
German-based Gottlob Frick started his singing career as a member of the Stuttgart State Opera from 1927 to 1934. He sang some solo roles in minor opera houses in Germany in the late 1930s and was discovered by conductor Karl Böhm, who hired him for the Dresden State Opera in 1941. In 1950, he moved to Deutsche Oper Berlin and starred in major opera houses throughout Europe. His smooth, dark, sinister voice was well suited for stately and villainous roles. When Decca Records planned their epic Wagner Ring Cycle recording 60-plus years ago, he was the perfect choice for Hunding in Walküre and Hagen in Götterdämmerung. In Mozart's The Magic Flute, the character Sarastro is the high priest of Isis and Osiris, and the role calls for a deep and authoritative bass. In the second act, after the Queen of the Night demanded that her daughter Pamina murder Sarastro, in his temple, Pamina begs forgiveness for her mother. In his aria, In diesen heilige Hallen, Sarastro says that revenge is unknown within this sacred hall. If a man has fallen, love guides him to his duty. Man loves his fellow man, and here no traitor can lurk, because enemies are forgiven. This recording dates from 1954.
In diesen heiligen Mauern, wo Mensch den Menschen liebt, kann kein Verräter lauern, weil man dem Feind vergibt. In solche Lieren nicht erfreuen, verdient nicht ein Mensch zu sein. Wenn solche Lieren nicht erfreuen, verdient nicht ein Mensch zu sein. Wenn solche Lehren nicht erfreuen, verdient nicht ein Mensch zu sein. Ein Mensch zu sein.
California-born Jerome Hines was a man with diverse interests beyond his singing career. He studied math and chemistry as a college student at UCLA, while also taking private voice lessons. He made his opera debut at the young age of 20 with the San Francisco Opera in 1941. His debut at the Metropolitan Opera was in 1946, and would continue there for another 41 seasons with more than 800 performances. From 1958 to 1963, he sang major roles in Parsifal, Tristan, and the Ring operas at the Bayreuth Festival. In 1962, he sang Boris Godunov at the Bolshoi Theater with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in the audience in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Hines was 6 feet 6.5 inches tall and was wearing much taller boots even, and met Khrushchev backstage and relished telling the story about how short the Soviet dictator was at only 5'4". I remember him singing the role of Gremin in Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin with Portland Opera in 1992. At the time, the longevity of his career was noteworthy. He was 71 years old and had made his Met debut 46 years before his Portland appearance. Today we will hear him as the devil Mephistopheles in Gounod's Faust. In Act 2, soldiers, students, and villagers are milling about, singing several songs, when a stranger in their midst claims he knows a better song. At this point, the villagers do not recognize this jovial fellow as the devil, but they have some doubts after he sings a rousing and irreverent song about a golden calf. In imagery and verse, the tune captures mankind's idolization of gold, and in the frenzied race to get more, Satan leads the dance. This short clip is from a staged production of scenes from Gounod's Faust in a 1963 television program, The Voice of Firestone.
Pour fêter la femme idolâtre des peuples confondus, compris d'esprit, dans Santine, l'homme folle, autour de son pied, autour de son pied, et c'est à lui le boy, à lui la balle, et c'est à lui le boy, à lui la balle.
Cesare Siepi, who was born in Milan, Italy in 1923. His early operatic career was interrupted by World War II, and he sang at La Fenice and La Scala after the war. His first appearance outside of Italy came at the Liceu in Barcelona in 1947. His rise to international stardom came as a last-minute replacement in 1950 in the Metropolitan Opera's new production of Don Carlo. According to General Manager Rudolf Bing, Siepi made an overpowering debut. He would go on to sing nearly 500 performances at the Met over the next 23 seasons. In 1952, he made his first appearance as Don Giovanni at the Met and became the Giovanni of choice at opera houses around the world. Siepi's voice was warm and smooth, and his swashbuckling stage presence was perfect for the role. In Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, with excellent libretto by Lorenzo da Ponte, Giovanni's servant Leporello has catalogued more than 2,000 seductions by his master. In Act 1, Scene 3, the Don is planning a party, and in his well-known champagne aria, he says he's looking forward to at least 10 more conquests in the evening ahead. He tells Leporello to encourage young ladies in the village to come to his party. In this performance, you will see and hear that Siepi had the voice, stage presence, and swagger to make a convincing Don Giovanni. This video is from a 1954 Salzburg Festival production conducted by Wilhelm Furtwängler.
Calda la testa, una gran festa fa preparar. Se trovi in piazza qualche ragazza, te con quella cercaverai, te con quella cercaverai, cercaverai, cercaverai. Senza alcun ordine la fantasia, il minuetto, la follia, fino alle banda a fare ballare qui. Il minuetto fare ballare, fino alle banda a fare ballare, qui la follia fare ballare. Il mio cantando dall'altro canto, con questa quella voleggiare, voleggiare, voleggiare. Alla marita, alla mattina, una decina deve aumentare. Alla mia lista, una decina deve aumentare. Se trovi in piazza qualche ragazza, e con quella cercaverai. Alla marita, domattina, una decina deve aumentare. Senza alcun ordine la danza sia, il minuetto che la follia, fino alle banda a fare ballare. Alla marita, domattina, una decina deve aumentare. Una decina deve aumentare. Una decina deve aumentare. Deve aumentare, deve aumentare, devi
American bass Samuel Ramey was born in Kansas in 1942. After studying music in college, he was an apprentice at Santa Fe Opera, then moved to New York, where he got his first breakthrough with the New York City Opera in 1973. Whereas most of the singers we've discussed so far tended to sing traditional heavy roles, Ramey had the range, versatility, and skills to branch out into some less well-known repertoire. He sang lots of Handel and Rossini, virtuoso music that had been neglected for generations. With his early triumphs, he was in demand and performed in all the major opera houses in Europe and the US. In 1984, a spectacular new production of Handel's Rinaldo opened at the Met. This opera is set in Palestine during the Crusades. In his opening aria, Argante, the king of Jerusalem, sees that his city is under attack, his army is losing ground, and pleads with the general of the Christian army for a 3-day truce. Here's how the scene is described by fellow Oregonian Brian Kello in a 2015 Opera News magazine feature article. Samuel Ramey was fast becoming a bass to be reckoned with on the international circuit when he broke through as a full-fledged star with his 1984 Metropolitan Opera debut as Argante in Handel's Rinaldo. Admittedly, it was a showy entrance. He rode onto the stage in a chariot, but it was his electrifying delivery of Sibillar li angui deletto that cemented his place in opera history. His amazing command of breath and legato, round richness of tone, and trumpet-like top sounded the arrival of the most exciting bass discovery in years. It is so unusual to encounter a bass voice of such amplitude paired with such magically speedy pinpoint coloratura that critics and audiences greeted Ramey's stardom as if they had uncovered the existence of some new, baffling, exotic species.
io ven mi servei vento, mi servei vento, io ven mi servei vento. Ne ancora ne guidava villa di timor, pena mie, di timor, pena mie. Sibiloia guida letto,
Italian bass Ferruccio Furlanetto's first exposure to opera took the form of learning excerpts from Il Trovatore from his great-grandfather. He had a brief solo career in pop music as a teenager, had no formal training as a classical singer until his early 20s. He followed the path of his idol, Cesare Siepi, in focusing on Mozart, and attributes his vocal health and longevity to this approach. His career took off in the mid-1980s under the mentorship of Herbert von Karajan. Today's program opened with King Philip's aria from Don Carlos sung in French. It's one of the greatest arias in the bass repertoire, and I'm going to conclude with that same aria, this time sung in Italian. This video is from a 2010 performance at the Met. The production, however, was borrowed from Royal Opera House in London. The director, Nicholas Heitner, staged a new production in 2008 that was built around Mr. Furlanetto's conception of the role of King Philip. Heitner had such respect for Furlanetto that the singer was given the latitude to portray King Philip exactly how he knew he wanted to. In a May 2013 Opera News interview, the singer describes his approach in these words. I thought that it would be nice to depict the private life of this all-powerful man. King Philip II was the most powerful man on earth in his time. I love the idea presenting him not in terms of the grand public scenes of spectacle, but in solitude. If you can really get across that behind four walls he is just a human being like anyone else, then you have space for pain, for tears, for happiness. And so I did. And considering the music that Verdi wrote, I think this is the only way to play Philip. If Verdi would have wanted a more simplistic character, he would have written more densely. Instead, he left space for introspection, for a look into this man's soul. End of quote. And here's the concluding portion of King Philip's soliloquy, Dormirò sol nel manto mio regal. Partial translation, I shall sleep only in my royal robes when I attain the evening of my days. I shall sleep only beneath the black vault in my tomb in the mausoleum. Near the end of the aria, he clutches a portrait of the Queen's secret lover, Don Carlo, and sings in anguish, Ella jamais m'amò, she never loved me.
Poter